Welcome to It's No Secret, a podcast for those who want their money questions answered.
Join us as we talk to real Kiwis and share truths about our own financial lives, because the truth is, there is no secret to achieving financial freedom. Lovely listeners, welcome back to another episode of It's No Secret. Today we're chatting about money tips for those of us that are in their 20s or 30s, or perhaps just feel like they are for spirit. Like these are still relevant money tips.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah, any age and stage of life. We're covering this topic because in your younger generations, but really carries on throughout your life, there's a lot of full and big decisions, you know, figuring out your finances, career paths, relationships, long-term goals, thinking about those chunky life moments. It can feel really overwhelming, and we absolutely know that. So we want to break it down and share what we wish we knew and are still figuring out ourselves, and really are the things that we should be checking in on every year. So, you know, now we're probably a little bit off the high of like new year, new me buzz, but it's still a relevant time to check in to just make sure that the core kind of building blocks to like anybody's financial foundation are in the right place. As we always do, we kind of want to acknowledge that everybody moves at their own pace. So please don't think of this as like a checklist to tick off and figure out whether or not you're passing or failing. There are absolutely moments where you might be crushing it in one area, but kind of lagging a little bit in another. That's just life. It will carry on that way. The goal here isn't to make you feel behind, but to provide some useful insights and practical steps on how you can move a little bit forward no matter where you are. So with me is Tim.
Perfect. Hello, everyone.
Back on the pod.
That's right.
I've actually just come off a presentation that Tim and I were just talking about, covering the exact same topic. So I feel like this is super top of mind. This is great. I'm feeling energized about it, which is fantastic. We're going to talk through, I guess, kind of 4 to 5 key things that really can be considered at any time, but are crucial to start in your 20s.
Exactly.
Wouldn't you say, Tim? Because it's like start out as you intend to continue. Get the foundations right.
Get the habits going, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if you are not in your 20s and you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I haven't done this before, please don't panic. You can still do this. You've got time. Yeah. So talk to me about the first thing. Like, what is the number one thing?
The first thing we have on our list is emergency funds. So we have a stat here. It's a bit old. So back in 2022, the Commission for Financial Capability did a survey, and they found that 39% of respondents could not access $5,000 to cover an emergency within a week without going into debt. Yeah. So that's a bit scary.
It is a bit scary. It's not uncommon though. We definitely do know. I know there's also been stats done by ASB across their customer base around like how many people could very easily have access to $1,000 in case of an emergency, and very, very few of us do, less than like 1/3 of Kiwis.
Yep.
So yeah, it's certainly not uncommon, but is super crucial, because going into debt in an emergency is just going to add to the stress of the emergency in the first instance. Yeah. And then, of course, potentially set us down a path of like just not a great financial outcome. So, Tim, not to put you too much in the hot seat, but do you have an emergency fund?
I sure do.
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Do you check in on it frequently?
So I went... So I recently reached my I think I'm comfortable with this amount. And for reference, for me, I have a partner, so like I'm comfortable kind of having a little bit less. So I've got like 8,000 is my
comfort amount.
My comfort amount.
Yep.
And I have
just
a credit card as well. Just for me, mostly. She's very good at saving.
Has her own emergency.
She has her own emergency fund, and that she can tap into that anytime. And the way I structure it right now is like I have like $3,000 in my Westpac account.
Yeah.
$5,000 in Smart Saver, and then that's pretty much it.
Nice.
And that's the way I've structured it. It seems to work so far. And like I'm going through like this problem of like, do I keep adding to it? Do I just limit it at that? Or like, so it's just that weird one. But right now it's fine.
Yeah.
Haven't had any emergencies.
You're like, this is great.
This is great. So
this is great. Yeah. I mean, I think that is definitely also the common challenge that people have with an emergency fund, is just figuring out how much do we put in there and then where do we put it? But I feel like kudos to you, because you've done the good thing of like keeping the majority of it separate from your day-to-day transactional banking, which is pretty crucial if you're the type of person that might dip into it on a weekend, out of sight, out of mind, but also keeping it like within easy access is important.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, kind of, I guess a common strategy that we talk about is perhaps having somewhere between like 3 and 6 months of living expenses. Now, for some people, like if I think about myself, 6 months of living expenses is
It's
a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Because we're super like an expensive time of our lives.
Yep.
And the idea of even just being able to save that is a bit daunting.
Oh, 100%.
And so, yeah, we're probably a little bit similar, I would say, to you, Tim, in that we've not like plucked a number out of thin air and just felt like it's hard. But, you know, we've got a gut feel on, you know, I probably would be a bit uncomfortable if we had less than $15,000. I might want it to be more around like $20,000.
Oh, yeah.
And at one point in time, I think the most we had in our emergency fund was 25. And I was
nice.
like, that's a bit like beyond that. I start to get a bit like antsy, like we could do something else with that.
That's always, yeah. Once it gets over a certain limit, you're like,
yeah.
do I really need this much money for an
do
emergency?
something else?
Like, but yeah, it is.
Exactly.
It's one of those things.
Exactly. But for anybody that doesn't have an emergency account, I think, you know, obviously a good place to start is maybe like $5,000 for an individual, $10,000 for a couple is kind of a good rule of thumb.
Oh, exactly.
Or going down the path of like, yeah, around maybe 3 months living expenses.
Yep. 100%.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So you've not used your emergency fund ever, Tim?
Actually, now that you've said it out loud, I've had to dip into it.
Okay.
But it wasn't for an emergency.
Okay.
It was for like like I've just been booking holidays and stuff like that. So I was rejigging money around.
Okay.
I have money.
And you've then paid it back.
And I paid it back. It's
Yeah.
fine. I just needed to like pay for the actual thing, and I didn't really have cash in my
Yeah.
account at the time. And I was just like,
Okay.
okay, I'll take some here,
Yeah.
but I'll move money out,
Yeah.
like that kind of thing.
Fair enough.
Rejigging.
Yeah, fair enough. Which is, yeah, definitely a common thing that happens. So yeah, emergency funds, definitely step one. Step
Exactly.
2 would be understanding your cash flow. And we like to
Yes.
talk about it cash flow because we kind of joke that like we need to rebrand budgeting. Nobody likes talking about a budget. No one likes the idea of being restricted. But really, you know, understanding your cash flow is crucial because without knowing what's coming in and what's going out and therefore what you have left over, you really have nothing to work with and you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, right? Because
Exactly.
there's no point trying to think about like investing or growing your money if you really don't have a handle on that. So, Tim, I feel like you're a spreadsheet nerd with your budget. Is this right?
A little bit. I separate it into buckets. So I basically shout out to pay.net.nz. Basically, I just do that and
Yeah.
then split out like what I have left in the week and just allocate certain percentages to each spend.
Yep.
Like, for
Okay.
example, like I'm one of the lucky ones that can actually follow like a 50, 30, 20 rule.
Yes.
Because I have relatively low expenses. I live in the city. I walk everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't have a car.
Yep.
Like things like that add up.
Yes.
So I'm like, okay, I have like most of my needs are like are covered by the 50% thing, which I'm really
Stoked
lucky
with.
Yeah, stoked with. But I am fully like, what's the word? I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm like, this is not going to last for that long. So I'm going to try and
Yes.
make the most
Gotta
of it
make
as
the
I
most
can.
of- yeah,
exactly.
sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I think about
Okay.
it. And
Nice.
yeah, it's been working so far.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So are your buckets set up tagged to goals?
Yep.
Is that how the buckets are working?
In my 9 bank accounts, Kat.
Yeah, I
like-
was going to say, I feel like there's a few, yeah. But I kind of get that in some ways because that is how we used to do it with advice where we would figure out what the surplus was and then name the buckets the goal. But some of the buckets, I mean, they wouldn't all be cash. There would sometimes be like an investment bucket
Yes.
or like a fund bucket or whatever that is. But obviously it starts with the cash because you need to make sure that the right amounts are going in at the pay frequency
Yep.
to whatever bucket it goes into.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, not just keeping it all within the one account is important. And I think this is really important because I feel like I've possibly talked about this recently with Christine of like we just don't really have a good bucketing system at all. Like we've just really, really gotten to the place that I think is probably super common with people where, you know, all the money comes into like one account, all the bills go out of that account. I have at times set up automatic transfers, but I tend to put them on pause when certain things happen, like we go on holidays and then I don't unpause them. And then I look at money on our account when it comes in. Like the other day, I had been paid last Friday. Luke got paid yesterday. In between those 2 paydays, I'd not transfer any money out of our account. So then I log in and I'm like, oh my God, we're so rich. But we're not. The point is like, you know, for a transactional account, it had way too much money in it, which is then not great because you're like, I could go out for lunch today. I might do these things. I'm going to go buy myself a dress for the wedding on the
false
weekend.
sense of security,
like,
right?
Exactly. And then you're like, hold on. I should have, because I didn't have the automation going, had, you know, $1,000 go into our saving account last week, and that meant that, not as much as what's in here is actually for us. But of course, when you don't have the automation, it's very reliant on you having discipline.
Yep.
And right now I have zero discipline.
So do you just manually like move things around?
I have been, Tim.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I know. And then what's bad is like sometimes the manual movements will be from our bank account to our Kernel account because I'm like, I don't need that money right now. We'll just park it there. But then other times the manual movements are just to our savings account.
Yeah.
But then of course you just see like the manual, back and forth juggle of like, and I tend to do the classic thing of I overestimate it. So if I'm like, like the example of, there was I think $5,000 in our account, and then I look at it, I'm like, okay, our mortgage goes out tomorrow. That's like $2,000. So then I'm like, quick mental maths, $3,000. And then I'll be like, boom, I'm going to transfer 2.5, which is way too much because we can't survive on $500 for the next fortnight. Like what?
How does that work? Yeah.
And it's just like really pointing out that you're just human and your own worst enemy.
Oh, 100%.
And so maybe setting up systems in a cash flow way is really, really the best thing to do.
Oh, exactly.
So I know I'm currently my own problem, Tim, but
oh, hey, this is just real life, right? Like you can set up all these automations and like it still messes up. I have like a really complicated setup with my automations at the moment, and it doesn't cover it like completely.
It's too much.
There's sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure I have some money in this like in my transaction account. Essentially, I'm pretty sure there's like a little bit left over there, but I don't really want to touch it just in case it fails. So it's like everyone's got their own problems. Like
Exactly. And I think it's just, probably being aware of that and really understanding that, yes, what is coming in is important. As you kind of highlighted, like payee.net is a really great website that we talk about for that in terms of just breaking down like your annual income into different like pay frequencies and understanding based on your KiwiSaver contributions and tax and maybe a student loan, like what your net pay is, and then being able to bucket off that. And setting up some automations is great, and being able to review and adjust and compromise.
Exactly. I
feel like I'm not doing a lot of compromise right now, but that's okay.
Non-negotiables.
I feel
just
like
happening.
I'm aware. I'm in that awareness phase, but I'm not yet in the action phase of changing it.
Oh,
I'm living in denial.
It takes a while. To get
awareness but denial.
I'm kind of going through it right now with like eating out. I'm like, I know I'm like saving up for a holiday, but I really like food.
Yeah. Well, Tim, my current excuse is I'm like, I'm not going to send that money to our Kernel account because we're currently landscaping, so I'm probably going to have a bill soon anyway to take it out.
Yeah.
And then I just tricked myself into being like, we need this money. But then I'm like, no, Kat, just put it in the account and just,
don't touch it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
anyway.
it happens.
We are human.
Exactly.
This is the problem. So we've talked a bit about this already, but this really then links into like, what is the third thing? Goals. Talk to me about them, Tim. What are they? How does one do this?
It depends, right? Like, like the main thing I always refer back to is like the whole SMART system when you set goals, right?
Yes.
I try and do this. It's very hard to like just sit down and do it.
Yeah.
But essentially, SMART stands for.
Can we dig into that?
Yeah,
Why do you find it hard?
It's just like actually sitting down and being like, okay, this is the one thing I want to do, but I'm like, what classifies as like,
Okay.
How do I describe it?
Is it because you don't know when you want to do it?
Yeah, it's a bit of that. It's a bit of like
the thing?
what's achievable, what's like that kind of thing.
Okay.
So like for reference, SMART stands for specific, measurable, actionable, or is it attainable?
Yeah.
What's the R? I forgot.
Oh.
Oh goodness.
Oh my.
T is timely.
Timely. Okay.
And
let's
then R is my goodness.
We're gonna just Google this quickly. What is
the
R? Achievable, relevant.
Relevant. Yeah.
Has to be fit for purpose.
There you go.
That's fair.
Yeah. So I have a lot of trouble with like the timely piece because I'm just like, I just don't really have like a specific timeline. I'm just like figuring it out half the time, or it's like, oh, what's attainable? Am I like not trying hard enough?
Yeah,
like that kind of thing.
That is a common challenge.
Yeah. So this is the main thing that I probably like out of this list that I struggle the most with, and people do this all the time.
Definitely.
Like new year, new me type of thing. I'm like, oh goodness. Like,
do you know what though? So literally when I was doing this presentation today talking exactly about this, I asked the room and I was like, so do you guys have goals?
Yeah.
And I think out of maybe like 45 people, 2 people nodded their head and everybody else looked really panicked. And then I was like, do you think you're going to be able to do that? And they also looked really panicked.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, so perhaps there's just another way to do it. Like one of the scenarios that we used to do for people when I was an advisor was maybe rather than just like writing down goals, take a moment in time that is relevant to you. It might be like 5 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever that is. And basically just sit down with a piece of paper and write out what your life looks like in that moment in time. So if you think about yourself, like maybe we just do 10 years from now to then help you work back from there, is like, okay, so you're sitting down and you're just writing yourself a story that literally is like, I am living here. I'm with these people. I spend my time doing this. I am working in this type of role. I've just come back from doing this on the weekend. I drove this type of car there. I did, and try and be like, a little bit more creative with it from the point of view of just telling the story of how you see yourself.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So that you can then start to break down some of the components or steps that would need to happen over the next 10 years in order for you to potentially actually live that life.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And I remember doing this. I don't even remember when I think this actually came up in university. And then I did it a little bit later on when I was an advisor, and I so distinctly remember writing the story. I still have it in this book. Now I should probably dig it out and find out how many things have come true. But it is a little bit one of those things of like, I remember writing down and being like, Luke and I live here. We live on this type of property. We've got X number of children. They're doing this type of activity.
Yeah.
I was like, I remember writing that we had a plane and we have like a small airfield. Like it was quite out there.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is that you should kind of think quite big and then figure out like the things that, okay, well, Kat, if you actually really envision yourself being able to have a small plane because your husband's a pilot and that would be really cool, like you can't really have that in Mount Eden. So if that's sense. Truly what you want, like, are you guys thinking about maybe moving outside of the city, and what does that look like? And is that something that you're doing whilst you're still working, or is that something that you're doing like later in life? And then kind of, I guess, being able to have the conversation within yourself or with a partner to talk through some of that stuff, rather than necessarily thinking like, okay, I have to buy a really large property by 2030. Because that feels really daunting and stressful. Whereas if I'm like, I want to move towards some steps that within the next 10 years help me create this life that I've just written down, that feels a little less daunting. And full on.
And you give it like a bit of a story as well, right? And it feels a bit more motivational that way.
Exactly. And it's cool to reflect on the stuff, like I think including the things about like who are you spending time with and what are you doing, because it also kind of helps frame up like if you're not close to your family, as say I am, but it's important to you that you're in that story that you're spending lots of time with them. Well, that is therefore a financial goal, because that then translates for us into having the resource to be able to say travel between Australia and New Zealand with some frequency so that I can spend time with my family, or being able to have the ability to maybe like bring them here. And so then you start to break that down into like, okay, well, what does that look like? Is that, $10,000 a year as an expense line that needs to be covered in order to be able to facilitate, okay, then I've got a goal or something that I can work towards.
Oh, exactly.
Or something that I need to put in my cash flow.
Oh, there
my
you go.
bucket system.
Put a certain amount of money away every time. That kind of thing.
Exactly. Because otherwise I think, the long-term things, which is what we see often at Kernel, right, when we talk to our customers, is they're like, I'm just saving for the future. And it's like,
general investing.
Of course you are. Like I said today, I'm like, no shit. Like if you've opened, like, of course you're saving for the future if you've opened an investment account. You're that type of person. You wouldn't have opened an investment account, if you didn't want your future to be better. And that's okay. But I think that's like the given. It's then figuring out the specifics.
Oh, that's such a great point. It's a very good point.
So Tim, how are your specifics?
My specifics, I can't tell you that story right now.
Okay.
But I do know that it will be like, I would love to live near my parents.
Like
that kind of thing.
It's one of those things that I think when pros the idea, you're like, oh God, that would be hard. But then when you actually do the exercise and you sit down for like 15, 20 minutes and you just write, I feel like it's actually quite easy.
Yeah.
Because most people will probably know. You probably do have it in your head.
It's
you just never actually put it down.
Just sitting down and just writing it and that kind of thing. But like now that I'm actually like thinking about it now, I'm just like, oh, I can see myself going back to Christchurch, just like living there near my parents, hour drive away.
Doing different things.
Living in a pretty decent house. I don't know what that looks like.
And so then I guess, if you say had that using that example, that then might materially change your more short-term decisions about, do we buy something in Auckland?
Yeah.
Because actually that might then give you comfort that it's like, that's not a short to medium term goal that I need to have if actually, my 10-year thing is to be back there.
Yeah.
And perhaps I look at something like, which I know we sort of discussed with you in the past, of like, perhaps I do an investment property in Christchurch because ultimately I would want to be in the Christchurch market if I want to live there. And it just helps you, I think, frame up some of your shorter term decisions as well.
Yeah. Yeah, my parents would love that. They're like,
they're going to listen to this episode and be like, Tim's coming home.
Tim's coming home.
Yay.
They're always like, buy a investment property in Ashburton. I'm like, why are you hounding me to go to Ashburton?
For this. I love this.
Oh, it's so fun.
So every listener of the pod has that homework. If you haven't written a life story, like a snapshot in time, I would say 10 years is a good starting place.
That's a really good starting place.
It's probably not too far out that you can actually meaningfully envision what your life would be like.
Oh, exactly.
So
Nice.
Okay.
Oh, that's good.
What next, Tim? What else do we do?
Understanding your relationship with money.
Great.
I guess the point that I put in here is like, what are the things that you value, and like, how do you kind of react to money situations? Like, do you value going out drinking? Do you value going out on a hike? Do you value hanging out with friends and family? That kind of thing. So that's the way I see it. How about you,
Perfect.
Kat? Like, how do you?
I mean, I think this is definitely something to understand and unpick, and I agree that it's important, because if it is not considered, you won't set yourself up for success with something like a budget, because you will overlook the things that ultimately potentially fill your cup, or you need to, be factoring in, like Tim is telling us that he needs to be able to spend more money on restaurants because he's just loving that at the moment. So understanding that actually can be a good thing, and ultimately will do you better if you allow yourself some of those comforts, really,
exactly,
I guess. Because when we try and restrict ourselves too much of that stuff, we tend to just go in the opposite direction and have a blowout at some point. But also I think understanding any kind of psychological bias, or maybe just learned behavior as well that we picked up. I think that's definitely something in your 20s to start to consider, is just really questioning why do I think that about money, or why do I have that behavior? Is that just something that I observed from my family unit or my parents? Is this something that maybe a friend told me? Is it something that I've read and just assumed to be true? One thing that we obviously talk about is that money is deeply personal, and so there's no one right way, and actually perhaps we're doing money habits that we've just picked up from places that may not be serving us that well, and there could be another much better way to approach that thing. Thinking about that is really important, particularly important in your 20s and 30s if you're in a relationship and there's any complexity around you managing money with that person. So I guess, Tim, for you and your partner, you guys obviously have some shared finances because you live together. So you have to have some
conversation
ways,
around
ways and comforts, and understanding to also know she will do different things to you with money, because you each have different value sets and different priorities and other things.
And comfort with risk, right? As the point here, oh my God, this actually reminds me of
Tell us.
It took me ages to essentially get her to open up a Kernel account and put money in it. And I'm like,
to start investing.
I was like, you have all this money just sitting in your bank account, essentially doing nothing. Well, it wasn't the high, saving high-ish savings account with BNZ, but I was like, if you put this in any of the funds that we had that are invested in equities, you would be so much better off.
You'd be doing
essentially, great. I got her to actually go over the line in November last year.
Okay.
And
interesting, because you've almost been working here for 3 years, Tim.
I know.
So quite a slow burn.
What does that tell me about my...
what a conversion time.
I know. I'm telling you now, I hounded her. She went to so many events as well. I'm just
funny.
If Kat and Dean can't convince her, I don't know what will, honestly.
The hope here is lost.
Yeah, exactly. But I got her through the line in November, and this was right before I think it was right before Trump got elected.
Right.
So she managed to get that sweet rally right before that happened.
Yeah.
And
which is a dangerous first time investment experience too, because then you're addicted to the high.
Exactly. But I'm like, you also could have captured a lot of this
leading up to it,
but it's a big win. It was a good outcome because I mean, not that we can know timing the market, but it was really good timing.
Yeah. So made her feel good about her choice.
Yes.
She's now committed.
Oh, exactly. Well, like she's not putting more money in, but she's put money in, so I'm happy with that.
You're like, okay.
So it's a good experience now.
Yeah, exactly.
We're getting there.
But yeah, I mean, different people do, approach money differently. Interestingly, like at the end of that seminar that I just ran, someone came up to me and she was like, this is so great. And she was like, I'm having conversations with my partner at the moment about money and what we do and goals and everything. And she was like, but I'm not going to be able to explain any of what you just said in the same way that you did.
Yeah.
And I think that's also really important, where oftentimes in a relationship there is a disparity between how comfortable people are with like understanding and learning and talking about money and investments. And you're a good example, Tim. It's like you're in it, you're living it, you love reading about it. That's not what your partner is keen on doing. And so you then will probably talk about things in a way that are already potentially a little bit too technical or complicated for her because that's just how you do. And then also we can only explain it to the best of our ability, which is going to be different to their ability. And so it's just a bit of a shit show from a
it's a funny one.
Communication point of view, which is why so many people challenge or like are struggling with like talking about money with family partners. Yeah.
That's the thing. You almost want someone else to tell them because for some reason they just don't want to listen to you.
It's a third party. 100%. Luke does not want to listen to me ever. He knows now that he's locked in and he has to, and it's just better for him in the short run if he just agrees. But, you know, it is just one of those things of like, I think it takes a lot of open conversation and perhaps quite a bit of time with both people being committed to be able to understanding that. And if you find that, you know, there is somebody that isn't, like, don't push it uphill. Just try and meet them where they're at.
Oh, exactly, yeah.
You know?
And equally, if you don't have a partner and you kind of want to challenge your beliefs, just talk to someone that is kind of like on the same boat as you and are just trying to get started.
Find out what they're doing.
Yeah.
See what else you can learn.
Exactly. Listen to more podcasts, you know, that kind of thing.
This one. Exactly. Okay. And then the last kind of, I guess, foundational thing for any age, but is particularly important for people that are right now in their 20s or 30s, is making the most of your KiwiSaver. So fun fact, for those of you that are in your 20s, you're going to have KiwiSaver for your entire working careers. You're the first generation New Zealand to have had that. And it is going to be the largest asset that you have at retirement outside of your home. So it's really, really important that you are engaged with it to the level that you know what your KiwiSaver invested in, you're comfortable with the provider, you understand how it works, you understand how it can work for you, and you know when to make changes and when not to make changes.
Exactly.
Because ultimately as well, for a lot of us, once we pass that first home hurdle, if we're going to use KiwiSaver for a first home, you really have your KiwiSaver for a very long time. Yeah. And so that was really something that I think everybody can relate to as well, regardless of their age and stage. You know, if you're in your 40s, you still have potentially 20 years ahead before you can access your KiwiSaver. And then you probably want to live until your 80s, 90s or beyond. So you've got another like 15, 20 odd years there. It's really, really a long-term investment. So making sure that you're approaching it with the mindset of like, I'm in this for probably 50, 60 years. I feel like the idea of like a 60-year investment is kind of terrifying.
It is terrifying, but also comforting for me personally.
Is it?
Because
Why?
So the way I've like basically gaslit myself into thinking is like,
is this because you're like, I can't screw it up? I've got so much time to like.
That's one way I thought about it.
You know?
Yeah. And like the way I'm like kind of considering KiwiSaver right now is I'm like, maybe I've just like drunk the Kool-Aid a little bit. And I'm like, what if I don't actually use it for my first home deposit? Like I'd like to do a bit of math there from my personal situation. And I'm just what if I don't use it and just like let it do its thing for like
100%.
Who knows? I still want a house.
100%.
It'll just make it a bit more difficult to get into it.
Yeah.
But at least I know that that's there. And I'm already like, I've got a pretty decent chunk that I'm happy with putting into like investments and all that kind of stuff. And I can put that into the house as well. Yeah. So that's the way I'm kind of viewing it right now. Right now, the timeline is like 60 odd years. Yeah. So I'm like, this is plenty of time.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, you know, the Retirement Commission and stuff have done obviously numbers based around whether 3% is enough of a contribution for people.
Yes.
And I think where they've landed is that actually about 8% total between the employer and the employee is roughly where kind of the sweet spot is for New Zealand.
Yep.
Obviously within Australia it's higher, it's at 12%. And I think it's kind of a little bit of like, we can all pretty much acknowledge that 3% is not enough, but 8% feels good. But then also, thinking about having some investments or flexibility outside of also KiwiSaver is great. And approaching the fact that, your KiwiSaver is like 50, 60 years in its whole time horizon. But also if you want to have some flexibility pre-65, then you need to pair that with other investments that aren't just property. Some other liquid investments would be great.
Exactly.
And really understanding how to make the most of your KiwiSaver, which for a lot of people is pretty simple.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the main thing that people kind of get stuck on is that, yes, the timeline is far away. So like you don't really think about it, but equally if it's like, if you just do it now, that timeline is really far away. So you can just forget about it.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing.
Exactly.
Like if you can front foot it and then just do it, you're way better off and just like looking into it.
Yeah, exactly. I actually just had someone at that seminar ask me afterwards, she was a bit older, like probably one of the older people in the group that I was speaking to. And she said, with KiwiSaver, like, should in a couple of years when we need to access it, should we take it out and invest it in an investment account or keep it in KiwiSaver? And, if we want it, we do know we want to keep it invested for say like 20 years, but how do we do that? And it kind of came down to that operational thing of just structurally, because of how KiwiSaver works, it is a bit harder with most providers to get money out quickly because you've got to go through like paperwork and a few other things. It's just less flexible than, if we think about the speed of most investment platforms, and like you can place an order or a sell order out of a fund and get that money within like a business day and back in your bank account kind of in 48 hours. It's not that speedy in KiwiSaver. And so also just thinking about like if you are not in your 20s and 30s or you are in your 20s and 30s and maybe you're helping guide parents or others, getting them comfortable with the fact that actually even if they do take money out of KiwiSaver, the idea is still potentially for it to be invested because, from 65 to 85, you've still got 20 years. Exactly, you don't want all that money sitting in cash. But potentially an investment account just gives people more day-to-day flexibility.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and a bit less structure.
Exactly.
But yes.
Perfect.
Well, so many things.
I know, there was a fair bit of things, but...
I know, and I actually think like I feel like I say this all the time and I'm just like a broken record, but these are the things that you need to be aware of throughout your whole life. Like they just are the core things that... I mean, Tim, I can probably let you off the hook a little bit if your goals aren't smart enough because you're really crushing it on the other stuff. And also, I think it's very hard to be nailing all four at once. Kind of going back to what we said at the start, totally understand that like some people might not have their emergency fund where they want to be, but if that's the case, just make sure you're on top of your cash flow so that you can get your emergency fund built back up. Or if you're in a space where you don't have a lot of cash flow and you're working towards having more cash flow, maybe really focus on your goals and get yourself motivated to be focused on putting that cash flow to work when you do have it. Like all those sorts of things are totally reasonable. Not everybody is crushing all of this stuff all the time.
Exactly.
Literally as evidenced by this chat today. And I'm like, my budget is a shit show. I think my goals are good, maybe.
That's good. Yeah.
My relationship, I'm very self-aware of how my relationship with money is. Probably too self-aware that I've not done any action.
I feel like the fact that we're in the industry also makes it quite...
Yes.
We're biased in the sense of like we're obviously going to have a lot more tools and resources to be a bit better there.
100%, Tim. And also I feel like back to the thing of like different people have different approaches and biases to money. Literally, if you could read my text chat with my husband today, it was just about me being stingy and him being like too generous because we were talking, we were like booking things and talking about expenses and it just came up and then we were just joking about it and it's like, at least we know that. Like we know that that's our starting point. And then obviously finding the middle ground is the good place to be. But
it goes a long way.
Yeah. Starting with yourself is always good.
There you go.
I feel like that's the easy bit. Maybe not. Too much self-reflection.
It depends how stubborn you are, I'd say.
True. Exactly. But yeah, kind of 5 key things to focus on.
Nice.
Big thanks to Kernel for enabling us to do what we do. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe wherever you're tuning in, whether that's video on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch at It's No Secret NZ on Instagram. You can absolutely send us episode requests, questions, feedback and more. We've had a ton recently that have actually really helped inform podcast episodes, so please do reach out. And you will see Tim and myself back soon.